Another week, another fight backstage at AEW as Sammy Guevara got into it with Andrade El Idolo. This after the two shared barbs on Twitter over the past number of days, stemming from Sammy Guevara apparently saying that Andrade had hit him too hard, and Andrade going off in an interview about him. These two made it abundantly clear on Twitter that this wasn't a work, that this was a shoot, that these two had some animosity. We just didn't know that this would translate in what it would translate into backstage last night, and what it translated into was a fight. So this, by the way, has been confirmed by Fightful, Wrestling Observer, Newsletters, Dave Meltzer, as well as TMZ. So everyone's basically picked this up. We know that some sort of altercation did happen. The prevailing sentiment, according to multiple reports, is that Andrade was the aggressor and that he was the one who threw the first punch. There are other accounts that say that Sammy Guevara pushed Andrade first, which led to him eventually fighting back and eventually punching Sammy Guevara back. And the prevailing thought is that Sammy Guevara got hit about 2 or 3 times before things got broken up. And the final kind of nugget of detail from the actual fight was that prevailing thought is that Sammy Guevara tried his best not to be involved in this fight and didn't really fight back, which kind of made Andrade look worse for wear in this situation. So we know that's what we kind of know from all of these reports. There's a few other things that happened prior to this and after this that make this whole situation a little more interesting. So after these two had been trading barbs on Twitter over the past number of days, they were sat down last night. They were both told, whatever happens, you're not fighting backstage. We don't want any escalation in what this already is. AEW's already had a little bit of a problem with that if you go back to the Brawl Out after All Out. So they're trying to avoid these types of situations. But, and from reports, both Andrade and Sammy said, okay. And nevertheless, regardless, there was a fight backstage at Dynamite. And the other nugget of information prior to coming into this that makes it even more interesting is that Dave Meltzer literally said it, that Andrade is trying to get fired, which doesn't surprise or shouldn't surprise anyone. He's been posting #FreeAndrade on Twitter. He obviously, like many people, including myself, is not happy with the way that Andrade has been booked on AEW television, because he really has been booked like a weird enhancement kind of guy, but we're supposed to still think he's a star, even though Andrade El Idolo is one of the best in-ring performers there is in the world. But he's not booked like it in AEW, and it just hasn't worked. For whatever reason, it has not worked in AEW, and that's fine. Like, it's okay. We don't need to like pretend that everything's going to fit and everyone's going to fit in every company, because sometimes things just don't work out, right? It's when it becomes a habit that this becomes an issue. It's when you have, like a good percentage of the roster, like a nice percentage of the roster saying we don't want to be here. And from reports, with AEW, it seems to just be a handful of people, like 3 or 4, I believe, was the quote from Meltzer. But that being said, I mean, if this is Andrade's way of trying to get fired, it doesn't seem like AEW is going to acknowledge that request or grant that request, because they told Andrade, again, according to Meltzer, they told Andrade that if you start anything, you're not going to get fired. You're going to be sent home, but you're not going to be fired. They're not going to fire him for this. Now, whether or not they stay true to that, I don't know. One thing I do know is that Sammy Guevara is someone who, over the past number of months, has gotten a lot of grief and a lot of criticism. Some rightfully so, Some I think is blown a little bit out of proportion. I will say this. I'm not even going to go to the Sasha Banks comments. Those were terrible and disgusting, quite frankly. That and he is said to have grown from that, and I believe him, and I hope he has. But if we're talking about the what happened with the Eddie Kingston situation and him calling Eddie Kingston fat and him not having cleared that with Eddie Kingston and those two getting into an argument, Sammy Guevara probably should have cleared that with Eddie Kingston. I think that was more of a case of miscommunication rather than just even immaturity on Sammy's part or malice. I don't think it came from a place of malice. Like when someone's in your face, maybe like, yeah, you're going to say some things you regret and blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, I don't think there was malice behind those comments to Eddie Kingston. And Eddie Kingston even said as much. He said, yeah, I shouldn't have acted the way I did, and it wasn't Sammy's fault. And things smoothed over, and they apparently seem to be on good terms because Sammy Guevara apparently got the go-ahead to call out Eddie Kingston on TV as well. So I mean, but you can move past these types of things. And I think Sammy Guevara in that situation wasn't as wrong as people made it out to be, or as immature, quote unquote, as people made it out to be. Should he have gone back and forth with Andrade on Twitter? Maybe, maybe not. I think people read way too much into Twitter. I do think people read way too much into Twitter. And I think, Sammy Guevara did a little bit too. Like, sometimes it's really not that deep, and sometimes it's easy to take things out of context or without knowing what exactly the tone of the tweet is. You're just reading words on your screen, right? So I think that there might have been a little bit of a disconnect there. Whether or not he should have tweeted back and forth with Andrade is, I mean, if two people are actually going to get into a fight over tweets, I mean, I think that's just stupid. I think it's dumb. I mean, well, depending on what they might be. If you're threatening someone's life, then I don't know, but I don't think that this warranted that, is what I'm trying to say. It is an interesting backstage environment with AEW. Talent are said to be very upset. There was a contingent that was upset that Andrade ended up being sent home while Sammy Guevara actually stayed in the arena in DC and worked the main event. So you have a little bit of pushback there, although, again, if the reports are right, or if the prevailing sentiment, I should say, from these reports are right, it's that Sammy Guevara was not the aggressor, and that is why he was not sent home. Things are very interesting backstage in AEW. I can't imagine what some of the wrestlers feel like backstage, thinking that, they just maybe we put the Punk stuff behind us finally. The locker room seemed to be very cohesive over the past number of weeks. That meeting with Bryan Danielson, Jon Moxley, and Chris Jericho, who led that talent meeting, seemed to have really helped turn things around. And now we're here, and there's another fight. And it just so happens to be, by the way, I was at All Out. I was in the arena at All Out. I was in Chicago at All Out. And I was in DC when this fight happened. When this fight on Dynamite happened, during Dynamite, I was in DC. So it just seems like wherever I am, if there's an AEW show, there's going to be a fight now. So I will definitely not be in DC on Friday, so that doesn't happen to anyone. But maybe I will, so I can make another video like this. Yo, let me know what you guys think about this mess of a backstage situation at AEW in the comment section below. Hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you get notified whenever a new video is released.